Hello and welcome to the News 9 Plus show on the world's first news and current affairs OTT platform, News 9 Plus. India has a drone problem. Its military drones, to be more specific, have Chinese components in them. Now, India's Defence Ministry has just cancelled a large drone deal with a private Indian company. This 230 crore deal was meant to supply the army with 400 drones. These drones were meant to be used along the line of actual control with China. Why was the drone deal scrapped? It turns out that these drones had Chinese parts and electronics and were thus vulnerable to malicious Chinese code which could be used to hijack them. In fact, there have been several such instances where Indian drones had operational failures along the LOC and LAC. There are fears of data security, that the information gathered by these drones could be leaked to the adversary. Now, the basic issue is that India doesn't have a drone ecosystem that's sufficiently large to supply all its vendors with Indian-made components. What does India need to do to overcome this? Now, joining me to discuss this issue are Lieutenant General P. Ravi Shankar, Ankit Mehta, CEO, IdeaForge, and Group Captain Rajiv Naran. Gentlemen, welcome to the News 9 Plus show. Ankit, I want to start by asking you this. You're one of India's oldest drone manufacturers. Your company, IdeaForge, has been around for 2 decades? I understand that a drone is made up of many components, propellers, flight controllers, the central processing unit, which control the drone's flight using sensors. There's a battery, there are motors, cameras, ESCs, landing gear, all of that. It's a assembly of many parts. Tell us what percentage of all of these parts are made in India?
So I think when we look at the bill of materials, I think just at the bill of materials level, so typically we don't look at it at the bill of materials level. First of all, I think we look at it from the value perspective.
Right.
And from a value perspective, we are basically at least more than 60-70%, indigenous subsystem, producer. So because if you look at it, the way typically a drone will be built, right, is that you will buy subsystems which will be needed as raw materials for building the technology. Then you will build the technology, which is your in-house effort. And
Right.
then you will sell the product to the end customer. So when we look at indigenous contribution, we have to look at the contribution that has been made by the OEM themselves, as well as the contribution that is coming from the components that they might be buying from the rest of the ecosystem. So from that point of view, it is more relevant to track the overall percentage of indigenization. And within that, for us, at least our systems have always been ahead of most of the benchmarks that have been laid out by the Indian government.
Right. But, there is a problem with cheap Chinese components finding their way into Indian military drones. I mean, how did that happen? Is it because of this L1 fixation, the fact that we want the cheapest, drone company, we want to give the order to the cheapest company, and he therefore buys the cheapest components available on the global market? Is that the real problem?
So I think, L1 is not really in that one sense, the problem here, right? Because L1 is irrespective of whether the subsystems are being bought from India or anywhere. I think, so let us look at what we do as an OEM, right? We focus on this problem in terms of subsystems in 2-3 layers, right? One layer is the layer of critical subsystems that have the vulnerabilities, that have the potential to have the vulnerabilities that you mentioned at the beginning, right?
Right.
The second layer is the component of what do we need to do to ensure that we have strategic autonomy in our country. And the third layer is meeting the indigenous content requirements so that we ensure that all the dollars are, prevented from going out if we can avoid that, right? So I think if we look at these 3 vectors in a very graded manner, then all of the requirements and what needs to be done will emerge. The first thing we need to do is we need to ensure that none of the critical subsystems are coming from any geography of concern, right?
Right.
Which, for example, as an OEM for us is already true. And for many years, because we've been building this technology from grounds up for the last 20 years. So for us, none of the critical subsystems have anything emanating from geographies of concern that is part of the chain that is relevant for the kind of misuse it can lead to, right? So that is true for us for many, many years. When it comes to strategic autonomy, there may be some more subsystems which are required for strategic autonomy. If somebody were to prevent us from getting subsystems from somewhere,
Right.
then we probably can get into a fix and our supply chains can become vulnerable. We
Right.
should have many options, and those options should not be built off technology that can be prevented to be shared from us as a nation.
Right.
So that vector, we have again done tremendous amount of progress at IdeaForge at least to make sure that our motors going forward, our ESCs and many other vectors are indigenous, right? Or are being built in India. Now, we have to also understand that when something is going to be built in India, at what level is it going to be built, right? Beyond the point, are we saying that we can build everything in India at any point in time? No country has the capability globally now
Yes.
to build everything that is sourced locally from the mines of that country.
Right. So,
Right?
but you use
Mines
that,
of that country
expression of
mines of that country
Yes.
is not going to happen. Right?
Absolutely. So that geographies
So
of concern is what we are trying to address, Ankit, and I'm going to ask General Ravi Shankar this question about this geographies of concern. General Ravi Shankar, China is one of the world's largest manufacturers of drone components. They're literally, years ahead of every other country in the world. How can we, insulate the system to ensure that no Chinese components infiltrate into our drone projects of the kind that Ankit was mentioning, that you ensure that the critical systems don't have Chinese components? How can we ensure that this doesn't happen?
Yeah, it's a very simple thing. All you have to do is lay down a policy that nothing from China can be into your critical system. As simple as that. We could do it in major systems where we said
Right.
no component from China can come in. And that's it. All the stock of 60%, 40% indigenous and all is I don't take it. Because I do know that in certain systems, the government has insisted that no Chinese parts and no Chinese parts for you.
But isn't that system already in play, General Shankar? The fact that you cannot import Chinese components, especially on your
there is.
military drones.
Yeah. Look, I'm not talking of drones. I'm not talking of a wider family of equipment.
Right.
And our systems, major systems which we built, the government has many times laid down these restrictions. Nothing from China can be brought. And nothing from China has been brought. And we built systems with that. So in this case, the government probably didn't lay down a stipulation like that. If they had laid down a stipulation like that, there wouldn't have been any Chinese parts, and all this thing wouldn't have happened also.
Right.
We wouldn't be in this problem. So it's a matter of the government laying down. Now, it's not enough to just lay down a policy and say you do what you want.
Right.
You have to enable that alternate system to flourish and develop here, which I think the government has not done it. I mean, I think I'm very clear that they have not done it. You have to have what is it involved? You need to have your own semiconductors.
Right.
You need to have your own processors. You need to have your own software. Now, the next question is it feasible for us to do it? Yes, it is feasible. Right? Have we done it? No. Will we do it now? After this, I'm sure we'll do it because this will be a great lesson. This, DeepSeek, all this, if you see.
These are wake-up calls.
These are huge wake-up calls. This will give us that message. Look,
Right.
if you don't do it, you'll lose the next war with China. As simple as that.
Yes. Yes,
And
absolutely.
you have to
So
start doing it.
there are no
Okay.
runner-up. There is no runner-up
No
in
runner-up.
conflict.
No,
Yes.
I want to put across something else.
Yes.
Is the government aware of this? Government is aware of this. Is the government at least started to do something of it? Happily, yes. Today there is a move. I mean, I know for myself in IIT Madras that we are starting to look at establishing a fab for semiconductors.
Right.
We already produce some processors or designed and developed processors. We have an OS system in place. So maybe in the next 3 to 4 years, we should be out of this problem if the government funds the people who can design and develop all this, and then they come up to scale. So it needs a whole of government approach.
It
If
needs
that
a whole
is
of
not
government
there,
approach. Yes, absolutely. Group Captain Narang, I'm just reading this report from the Times of India, which actually talks about the deal for 400 drones being scrapped. I mean, it's a very large deal and it's hundreds of crores literally. How did this actually get through with Chinese components? Why was enough diligence not exercised when testing these drones?
So, Ankit mentioned about what his company is doing.
Yes.
So, he's telling you that not all companies are using Chinese components.
Yes, there is an alternative. Yes, there is an indigenous alternative that's possible.
So, similarly, there are a lot of component manufacturers in India who are making indigenous components in India.
Right.
The problem in such procurement is there is no policy which is being implemented in the sense where we demand certain indigenous drones and drone component to the component level.
Right.
So since it's not stipulated in the your contract,
Right.
those aspects do not get checked. The second part is Indian Army has started now having realized that this challenge, they have started developing a drone framework.
Right.
But the challenge which they are likely to face, what General Shankar said is that there is no mechanism.
Right.
Who will identify indigenous content? Who will validate indigenous content? Who will certify indigenous content? Because you have to have a technical entity which is designated and which does this role. And the second part comes is the procurement. If there are indigenous manufacturers, even if you go to a government e-marketplace, is there a mechanism of picking up drones which are different from the assembled drones? There's no differentiation being done for the indigenous drones. So I think the people who are developing indigenous technology, they have to be given preference in the procurement.
Right.
And the next part comes is incentivization. India started with a policy on production linked incentive, but the policy did not differentiate what components were used. So I think we need to incentivize indigenous design. So I think
I'm going to go to Ankit very quickly before I wrap, Group Captain Narang. Ankit, tell us from a manufacturer's perspective what the government really needs to incentivize indigenization. Like you mentioned, you've been going that extra mile to ensure that your components are indigenous or from geographies that are not in dispute with us. What does the government really need to do now? This is a wake-up call, as General Shankar said, for us. And it was, a long in the making, this wake-up call about Chinese components in the drones. What does the government really need to do now to ensure that we don't have this, a repeat of this kind of an instance?
I think there are two very simple initiatives. One is continuing on the initiative that we have done already, which is the PLI scheme, come up with a much larger scheme. And the scheme is very well drafted in the drones business because it allows and wants everyone who's building drones to build their own intellectual property and sort of gives them at least 8% of their spends back to do more development effort, right? So that is one where each company is incentivized to do more. Second is that there is a need for an upfront R&D fund where the government invests upfront in innovative intellectual property creation, and based on various milestones of that, investigation, the government can release the funds, but we need to have commitment of large amounts of money to make sure that indigenization is evidenced and is created upfront, because most of the schemes give incentive after something has been developed, but this is an industry, in a critical industry, upfront capital availability is not very simple. And therefore, to incentivize it upfront and make sure that milestone-based gradation can be done to final delivery so that the cost is mitigated if at all there is a failure expected. But at the same time, we have committed people who are willing to create technology, get the resources where the technology can eventually get into the hands of manufacturers and producers like us and other people.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ankit Mehta. We were just talking about how the government really needs to step in now and incentivize indigenization and, of course, create an indigenous drone ecosystem that will ensure that the military gets drones with Indian-made components, and of course they're designed and developed in India as well. Thank you very much, Ankit, for joining us, Group Captain Narang and General Ravi Shankar.